Hello everyone, it's Elaine. Thank you for joining me today on my channel. I'm sharing this super cute shaker card I created. So let's get started. I've taken some Strathmore Bristol smooth cardstock along with my blueprint sketch distress ink, and I'm going to be applying a generous layer all over that cardstock. I'm using a piece of scratch paper there just to make sure I don't get my fingers in the ink. I don't want some fingerprint marks on my cards, so that helps with that. And I'm just applying that ink all over the background. I'm not really too worried if it goes a bit patchy and blotchy because I'll be distressing it with some water and some paint shortly. So I take some water on a paintbrush and just tap that all over that piece and then blot it up with a piece of paper towel. And then I decided that I wanted a bit darker at the top, so I'm taking my chipped Sapphire distress ink and applying that all along one edge. Then I take some more water, tap that on, and take my paper towel again. Blot that up. I take some Copic opaque white on an acrylic block with an old paintbrush and some water, and flick that all over the background. This is going to create the effect of a sky scene for my card. I leave that to dry and then I shall move on to my colouring. So I've taken another piece of that Strathmore Bristol smooth cardstock. I've heat embossed my image with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and then use some clear embossing powder to heat set that image, and I'm now using my Zig Clean Colour Real brush markers to colour it in. So I've sped this up quite a lot, and I've listed all the colours I've used down in the description box below. So I'm using my water brush to pull out that colour, tap off the excess onto a microfiber cloth, and then continue to colour so I get a nice blended look off of my squirrel. So I'm taking the brown, as you can see I just pull that colour out, tap it off onto my microfiber cloth, and then continue colouring. So every time you can see my paintbrush move away, it's to tap it off onto that towel. And I'm really enjoying colouring using these at the moment. It's a much quicker way to colour for me. And what I like to do is put some colour onto a non-porous surface. You could use a piece of laminated paper. I've got some contact paper on my mat here. I scribble that on and then I pick the colour up directly with my water brush and put it to my paper, and it just gives a lot more subtle look and not quite so pigmented, which is what I wanted for my cheeks and the ears. Now I'm colouring in the bow on her hat. I'm using some nice purples for that. I love the colour purple and I think it went really well with my background. And now I finished colouring off her ears, which I forgot earlier. So often I'm just using one colour to colour my images. I'm just using my gel pen to bring back her eyes, because they got covered up, and now I'm moving on to her dress, and I'm going to match that to the same colour as the bow on her hat. I do go over some of the images a couple of times, which I find is fine when you're using Strathmore Bristol smooth cardstock. I just wanted to deepen up those colours a little. And then I can move on to her cape, which again I'm just going to do with black and I believe it's dark grey, but I'll list all the numbers and the colours below. And then I shall move on to my little ghost. I'll just darken up that hat a little. I did have quite a lot of water on my brush when I coloured in that and it looked a little bit too washed out, so just deepening those colours a little. I'm using light blue for my ghost just to add a little bit of shadings and give him some pink cheeks. And my little squirrel, I'd add some gel highlights, some dots to the cheeks, and we're all done. We can move on to assembling the card. So now I've taken a die from the Outdoor Landscape 2 dies, I believe. I'll link it below. And I cut this tree out 3 times from black cardstock. I then take a piece of black glitter paper. I use another one of the dies, which is the Grassy Border die from the Outdoor Landscape 2 dies, and I just cut that out using my Big Shot. I trim it off, and at this point I'm not too sure what I'm going to be creating, so I haven't done anything with it. I start to assemble all my pieces together just to see where I might want things to go, and it's at this point that I decide that I quite like to make a shaker card. So once I've had a play around with my images, I decide I need a frame. So I take my inside scallop rectangle frame or die and just use a piece of white cardstock to cut that out. This is the largest rectangle in the set and is also from Craftin Desert Divas. And I take this little stencil brush and some distress ink in black soot and very lightly pop some colour down all over that frame just to give a little bit of dimension and interest to the card. I again take that same die and I want to cut out that scallop so that it will fit onto my frame nicely. So there we go, I've got my grass and I've got my little scalloped border along the bottom, and that's going to fit in there like that on the outside of the card. So before I start gluing everything together, I decide I need to put my sentiment somewhere. So I take this sentiment out of the set. This is a new stamp set from Craftin Desert Divas, which has been released in the month of September. I will link everything below for you. So I've cut my stamp because I couldn't fit it on all in one line. So I'm going to be stamping and embossing in 2 parts. So that first line, I'm going to use my embossing buddy. I then take my Versamark ink, stamp that down, and I'm using my Ranger Superfine White embossing powder for this card. I really like this embossing powder, and especially for tiny sentiments like this one. So once it's heat set, it does stand out a lot more. And then I pop my card back into the MISTI and then go ahead and stamp the second part of that sentiment using the same process, the embossing buddy, Versamark and embossing powder. I've applied some 1/4 of an inch double-sided tape to the back of the frame and now popping down a piece of acetate. And then I wanted my trees not to look quite so uniform, so I just trim off some of the branches just so they all look a little bit different. And then I've gone ahead and trimmed those up and secured them to my card using some Nuvo liquid adhesive. On the outside of that acetate sheet where my grass is going to go, I've applied some more of that double-sided tape and I'm just securing down my glittery grass. And then to house my sequins, I've put down some Scotch 3M foam tape. It was too wide for my frame, so I've cut it in half and just securing it all together, trimming off any excess, making sure there are no gaps so that my sequins don't fall out. And then I take my embossing buddy and I just run that all along the edge of that foam tape so that my sequins don't stick to the sides. And now I'm going to pop on some sequins. I am using some purple stars, hocus pocus and fairy dust, I believe, but I shall link them down below. And now I'm just taking my quickie glue pen and just securing some of the smaller stars to the background so that when the card is upright there's still some stars and sequins that you can see and they aren't all hidden down behind the back of the grass. So I did miss filming popping my frame on the top, but I just secured that over the top of the sequins before I shook them, and I think that looks really cool. So now it's time to adhere my squirrel. I'm again taking that Nuvo liquid adhesive and then securing it onto my card. Just popping that onto an A2 sized card base. Securing that down with lots of glue because it is quite heavy. And then my card is finished. Thank you for joining me today on that card process video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!